Transcripts are also on, so if people want to turn those on for themselves. Other than that, take it away.
All right, thank you. Okay, so hello everyone. We are going to be talking about essentially different tools and technologies that you should consider learning, and essentially what are the trade-offs of learning each one. So my name is Ashraf. I am the lead instructor at Debug Academy. I have the certifications for Drupal Grandmaster status. I also know React.js. Basically, I've been teaching for a while now, and I also am working on a number of Drupal and React projects. And Linda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Lynda Santiago. I'm a front-end developer, and I completed a coding bootcamp called for Lambda School, and I also completed the Debug Academy's Drupal course. I am currently a teacher assistant at Debug Academy, but I did learn the Drupal 3-month course here. And my skills currently is pretty much what you see here: HTML, CSS, Git, JavaScript, React, Drupal, decoupled web development.
Thank you. Yeah, Linda's a really talented developer. Let's see. So we're going to talk about various technologies and such. And I'd like to define the phrase site building. In the Drupal community, site building generally refers to people who use modules, let's say from Drupal.org. They download contributed modules, enable them, configure them. They'll often be familiar with HTML and CSS, but they might not typically need to use Sass, Twig, Git, Composer, PHP, or these other technologies, which we'll talk about. And these last two bullets are redundant, but they're not necessarily well-versed in using the command line. So a lot of the work in a site builder role consists of building most of the website often, but building it through the user interface of Drupal. So if you fit that description, sometimes you're wondering, what should I learn next? And we see all these, technologies, these buzzwords. You see Drupal 8, 9, 10, Backdrop. You see PHP, Twig, Sass. You see React, Vue, Svelte, a bunch of other things. Tailwind, Symfony, Laravel. There's a lot of different technologies that you could learn. And we're going to try to shed some light on the difference between them and what you should learn. Now, we're going to sort of compare those technologies, but not by the criteria that developers often use. So sometimes if I ask a developer, should I learn React or Drupal, they'll give me a technical answer. This is what the technical trade-offs are. But practically speaking, especially earlier in your career or before you're a developer, you don't care about the technical trade-off as much as you do about the career implications. And that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the options. And I want to put this disclaimer that there are way too many options to list. We're not going to talk about all of the options. We're going to talk about skills or technologies that are related to Drupal.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Sorry.
No problem at all. Okay, so yeah, I'm just saying that there's a lot of technologies, and we're not going to talk about all of them. We're going to talk about ones where employers will view your experience with Drupal as a content editor or site builder favorably. Okay, let's talk about some of the programming languages. I think React and Drupal are going to be lumped into this category, even though they're not necessarily languages per se. But first of all, when I say programming languages, if you've never learned a programming language before, hopefully this will help shed some light on them conceptually. So a programming language is similar to natural languages. similar to someone who speaks English learning Arabic or German. But there are some key differences. Programming languages have very, very limited vocabularies relative to spoken languages. There aren't as many words. They're also explicit, and there's no body language. Okay, so when you write code, there's no body language. Everything is very literal, but there are not a lot of words to choose from. Okay, so as a programmer, your job is to communicate functionality or requirements from your client using these limited languages, these programming languages. And let's take a look at a couple of languages. So HTML, you could think of it as level 1 of programming. Basically, it has a limited vocabulary, just like all programming languages, but HTML's vocabulary consists of primarily elements on a page. So we can see here that H1 stands for the primary heading, the first heading. The P tag is for a paragraph. The A tag is for an anchor link. And these are all things that appear on the page. So the HTML language, the vocabulary consists of which elements you want to put on the page. Now, this whole understood by understands concept, I mentioned this because with each language, you're actually writing it for an audience. For HTML, you're communicating to the browser. So to Google Chrome, to Firefox, to Safari. So when you write your HTML, you have to make sure that the different recipients of the message, the browsers you're talking to, that they understood your message the way it was intended. So what do I mean by that? If it were a natural language, right? In English, I might say, how are you, right? And if I say, how are you to most people raised in the US, they might just say, good. But if you say, how are you to someone raised in certain parts of Europe, they won't respond with good. They'll think about it and they'll say, okay, well, this is how my day is going. This is how my week is going. They might be surprised that you're interested in how they're doing, but they interpret it differently than someone in the US. And programming languages, you also have to think about who you're communicating with when it's a programming language. So with HTML, you're communicating with various browsers, and you have to think about, are they going to interpret this the way I intended? So that's a little sort of technical intro to HTML. Now let's look at the evaluation of whether HTML is something you should learn. In terms of ease of learning, HTML gets 10 out of 10. This is relatively ranked. So relative to other programming languages, HTML is likely the easiest to learn. However, the job availability is extremely low. If you learn HTML, that alone will not get you a job. The base salary for learning HTML, it's also not going to be impacted significantly from the fact that you know HTML. That won't be enough on its own. This final category rates how easy it is for you to get help. So if you're learning HTML and you're struggling and you want to ask for help, it is much easier to get help in HTML than, let's say, Drupal, because every web developer, no matter what technology they're using, tends to learn HTML. There are countless tutorials. There's a lot of sources for help. Now for CSS, it's another language, and its vocabulary consists of styling, positioning, visibility. CSS also communicates with web browsers like Google Chrome, Firefox, etc. And with CSS, you'll see a bigger difference in how the browsers interpret what you say to them. So Google Chrome might understand your CSS one way, whereas Internet Explorer might understand it a different way, even if you write the same CSS. So there's some more complexity in CSS when you write it. You have to make sure that all of the browsers understand what you're writing. I've got some kids nearby talking. Now, in terms of the ease of learning CSS, it's more difficult than HTML. It's still, relatively speaking, on the easier end, but it's more difficult than HTML for sure. In terms of job availability, it'll help more than HTML will help, but it's not easy at all to get a job with learning just CSS. Base salary also, if you do manage to get a job with CSS, one moment. It's like my screen share paused. 1 minute. Oh, there it is.
I can
Got
see.
it back. Thank you. Okay, so with CSS, the salary is a bit better than just HTML. If you're very good at CSS, you can do quite well. But this is primarily focused on people who are learning things for the first time. So it is quite difficult as a beginner to get a job with just CSS. In terms of help, there also is a very large community of people using CSS who are very happy to help. If you post on Twitter, for example, you'll find a lot of other people also learning CSS. Okay. The next language, I know there's a lot of information. When you watch the recording, feel free to pause and read the slides, but hopefully we'll get through as much as we can. Now, PHP is another programming language. PHP communicates not with the web browser. It does not talk to Firefox and Chrome and Safari. Instead, it talks to web servers. So think of that as the computer that the PHP is sitting on. That's the computer that talks to the PHP. So basically, you just need to get your PHP code working or understood by one web server, and then you can be sure that it's going to work globally. PHP's vocabulary is much more expansive than HTML. There's a lot more you can do. You can write much more complicated applications. Now, PHP is more difficult to learn for sure. It's easier to land an entry role with PHP than HTML or CSS. It's much easier, actually. If you get quite comfortable with PHP, you could do quite well. The base salary is good. You know, it's on the higher end. React and JavaScript and more specialized technologies will be higher, but you can do well with PHP. Now, one of the areas that's ranked lower in is helping hands, because HTML and CSS, it's very easy for you to find help for those. Whereas PHP, it's a bit harder. You don't see people talking publicly about learning PHP, and you don't see as active communities of people learning PHP. So you will have to do more learning on your own, or through courses like, Debug Academy, for example. But with PHP, you're going to have a harder time just finding meetups with people learning PHP as beginners. All right, Linda, I'll let you take the JavaScript.
Can you hear me? So with JavaScript, the way it works with JavaScript, you can JavaScript, it can read data, store data, create and compare, modify and return data. JavaScript can talk to the user's web browser. It actually does not wait for a previous line to finish before starting next line. That's actually, JavaScript is synchronous by nature. So that's what it means. Like, it doesn't wait for a previous line to finish. You can group code in various ways. And you can use many built-in functions that you can find on some websites. MDN is a website that's really good that you can use to find certain information about JavaScript. With JavaScript, it can understand web browser interactions and web browsers, and it's understood by web browsers. Below you see some code there. This is like, it's considered to be vanilla JavaScript. Vanilla JavaScript is pretty much plain JavaScript without any frameworks. So this, if you're not familiar with JavaScript, this might not make sense, but that's an example of what plain JavaScript will look like. So JavaScript is very, very popular. There are a lot of information out there, tutorials you can find on YouTube. There's a lot of websites you can learn it. Free Code Camp is actually a good website that's free and where you can learn JavaScript. For ease of learning, it's rated at 6. It's not that bad to learn JavaScript. It's not that complex because the environment setup is not, there's no environment setup. It's like much easier to get it up and running. Most schools do teach JavaScript. There are many JavaScript jobs out there. However, the market for junior positions is crowded and extremely competitive. The base salary is rated an 8. It's pretty high. The salary as a JavaScript developer, you could make a lot of money, you know, knowing JavaScript and having a position for JavaScript. Helping Hands is rated a 9. The JavaScript community is very, very large. You can pretty much get a lot of help on, if you hop on Twitter, I always see there's a popular hashtag people use called, I forget the name of it, but there are popular hashtags. I think 100 Days of Code is one of them, where people are willing to look into there and see what people are up to or if they need any help.
Thank you. And did you want to talk about your experience having learned? Oh, sorry, I think I'm getting ahead of you. There's a React slide coming up. Okay, we'll get back there. Thank you. Okay, so Twig is another one of these languages that you could learn. You might have heard that Twig was added to Drupal 8. And so Twig, think of it as sort of a cross between HTML and PHP. In Twig, you can write HTML, you can, write elements on the page, but you can also do some more advanced work. The vocabulary of Twig includes some features of PHP. Things like storing data in variables, calling functions, which are pre-written blocks of code, and so on. You can do quite a bit, actually. With that said, Twig is one of the easier languages to learn, but it's actually very difficult to land a job with just mastering Twig. Twig is one of those languages that you need to know, but you need to know for Drupal, but knowing Twig alone is not what employers are looking for. And you can get by with knowing a little bit of Twig if your goal is to work in Drupal. So I would not invest a ton of time in Twig as a career path. The base salary for a Twig job would be lower than PHP, higher than HTML, CSS. And in terms of helping hands, Twig is not only used by Drupal, it's actually used by a number of PHP projects, including Laravel and Symfony, which is nice, and they have good documentation for Twig. But the fact that it's used by more communities is nice because there are more people who can help. This brings us to Drupal. Again, Drupal is not a language. Drupal is a framework, but I don't think we have time today to talk about frameworks. So Drupal Naturally this is biased. We run Debug Academy, but I think Drupal is fairly easy to learn if you go through a course that has streamlined it, such as ours at Debug Academy. If you're self-teaching Drupal, I think there's a lot of pitfalls and it can be quite difficult. If you get good at Drupal, it is easier to land an entry-level role than it is for React or JavaScript or some other technologies. And that's because not many people are learning Drupal. So that drives up the salary, especially when you're a mid-level Drupal developer. It drives up the salary because the talent pool is very small. So there are not as many Drupal jobs out there, but there are so few people learning it that if you learn it and you learn it well, you can be competitive in the job market. In terms of helping hands, again, we have an asterisk. Our experience is, we have our Debug Academy community where, it's a very helpful group. The diversity and inclusion group also in the wider Drupal community organized this conference and is extremely friendly and helpful. This note is actually here, not for today. This diversity and inclusion group comment is always here because it's a big part of the community, and it's probably the most welcoming area in the community. Okay. Linda, did you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, sure. So for there are some frameworks for JavaScript that people nowadays they use instead of just writing vanilla JavaScript. Two of them, the popular ones we have is React and VueJS. Frameworks allow to give an additional layer on top of JavaScript, making it much easier, less code, and to make code easier to reuse. That's what these frameworks come in handy for. With React, it is open source and free to use. There are many, many jobs for React, many junior developers out there competing for work, very large community, many add-on packages. You can also use React for mobile apps, which is pretty cool, VR, and many other things. And it is used by many companies. It's very popular. Vue.js, it is easier to learn, recommended by many. It's popular with PHP's Laravel, which Laravel is a web framework for PHP. And in the next slide here, I'll be discussing about React. So it's rated a 7 for ease of learning. It's not that hard to learn React, especially if you know HTML, because React is like HTML, but you could use you could do add-ons to it with JavaScript and so on. There are a lot of great documentation out there if you go to React's website, and also YouTube tutorials, Free Code Camp, and many other websites there. Landing entry role, it is rated low. It is very, very difficult, extremely crowded. From my experience, actually, after I graduated Lambda school, I applied over 150 jobs, was only able to interview with 2 companies. The second company, I went through a 4 interview process, and where I was interviewed. First, it was recruiter. The second one was engineering manager. They were very impressed. So they moved me on to a 3rd interview, which was the engineering manager and their team. They were very impressed with the take-home project that I did for them. And then they moved me on to the last 4th interview, which was with a product manager. So they were very impressed. It was for a banking company, very great benefit salary, and I waited 3 to 4 months to hear from them, for them to later on tell me they moved on to somebody that had more experience than me. So it is very difficult from my personal experience for that, because there's more React jobs, I feel like, than web developers looking for a React job. The base salary is rated high. If you do get lucky to get in a React job, they do pay, a lot of money. And for helping hands, I'm not surprised that it's rated a 9, because React is very popular. A lot of people willing to help with React.
definitely. Wow, 150 applications and only 2 interviews. That's, you know,
I
that's rough.
know.
Yeah. So we have this summary slide, which basically adds up the scores from the various categories. Again, this isn't a comparison of which technology is best or which, or anything like that. But as a junior developer, as an entry-level developer, what is the early career payback in learning different technologies? And I did not fix these scores. I put honest numbers in each category and I added them up. And based on those 4 categories, Drupal did rank a bit higher than React. And I have a lot of experience helping people land their first job, through our company. And it has been my experience that it's not too difficult to get an interview for a Drupal job. Whereas with React, if you're entry level, it's very difficult to get an interview. So in our experience, learning Drupal is a good choice for early on in your career. Now, this was always planned. So we have some slides on programming frameworks, which we will not have time to go over, but I'd like to talk about where you can learn about these different technologies. So there's a number of learning resources. There are codeacademy.com, which has free and paid options. There's free Codecamp, as Linda mentioned. This one has free resources for learning JavaScript. W3 Schools, a number of people post videos and tutorials on YouTube. There's Drupalize Me, which has, you can get a paid subscription for Drupal videos, which I think is a very valuable service. There's also Drupal.tv, which has collections of recordings from all the various conferences. So even this conference will appear on Drupal.tv, and you can, it's a free resource. You can go look at all of the different conferences. You can search for videos from prior conferences as well and watch those. If you want to go into make a bigger commitment, basically, we have courses at Debug Academy. We have courses that range from 1 day all the way until a 3-month part-time course. And with this part-time course, you basically partner with your peers, you build a project together. The target is to contribute the project at the end of the semester. And yeah, we work with small groups, work very closely to streamline the learning process. If you're interested in learning with us at Debug Academy, please visit debugacademy.com. I'll throw a link into the chat to make it easy. I would recommend that you go to debugacademy.com and sign up for the newsletter, because that's the way you'll hear about upcoming courses and such. And if you go to Drupal.tv, you can search for the same talk and you'll be able to see a version of it with all of the slides. And if you have any questions, feel free to message, feel free to email. And yeah, I'll be here in the Zoom for a bit. Thank you all for attending, and I hope that this was beneficial.
Yeah, thank you for attending, guys.
Yay. If people want to unmute themselves and clap or anything, that's totally okay. There's no rule against that. Thank you both so much. I feel like there was so much good information here, and it makes it so clear how complicated it is to get into tech. There's so many different pieces, and I appreciated especially the sort of like, if you only learn HTML, this is how easy it is, like how much you'd get paid, how useful it is. It really breaks down why it's hard to get into, and why having that community piece and having that structure, whatever it is, whether it's Drupalize Me or Debug Academy or whatever you want to do, is so important. So thank you for that. It was really helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Does anybody have any questions? We do have a bit of time. Yeah, Drupal.tv. I also am going to give a +1 to that recommendation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and we're actually in the process of redesigning Drupal.tv. Hopefully our alumni are going to give it a facelift soon. We have a
Awesome.
design that's just about ready. So.
It's so cool. It's such a cool tool. Up next, we actually have in the same channel, I think, a talk that could be very useful to folks who have maybe considered a bootcamp or gone through bootcamp, which is an Ask Me Anything session with an HR professional from the tech world. So it's like a totally interactive session. I have collected some questions in advance. So things like, you know, when I send out 150 applications and only get 2 interviews, like what kind of thing can I tweak, or, you know, what should I expect? She's got tons of experience. So if people want to stick around for that, that'll be happening in 14 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to stop talking. So if anybody does have questions, they can go ahead and do that.
Is the recording stopped?